You can see the correlations to rape culture. The things that we are taught in purity culture and in those spaces, we're actually tuning down our wanting, our desire, our voice across the board. I stopped having sex when I felt obligated to have sex. So many Christian women feel like they have to have intercourse, punishing themselves and pushing themselves into boxes and feeling guilty for masturbating. And so there was all this pressure around how I had to show up sexually. Don't. As a woman, I was meant to be the gatekeeper so that I didn't cause men to lust. I talked to my husband about it and I was like, honey, I am not ever going to say yes.
Kia ora everyone and welcome back to the podcast today. You're with Lilia Tarawa on Brand Breaker. I have a beautiful guest for you today from Tauranga in New Zealand. So we are homegrown today and she is a sexologist and relationship coach. Now, what does it take to leave a church that was your entire life, to deconstruct purity culture and find yourself, and then go on to help others reclaim their sexuality and sexual power? Well, Meg is here to tell us all of her secrets today. I'm so happy to have you on the show. Meg Cowan, everyone, welcome to Brand Breaker.
Oh, kia ora. So nice to be here.
So can you just tell us a little bit of your background? I'd love to know some of your story, what got you into this work, but ultimately, where did you start with the church?
Yeah, so I never thought that I would be the girl who talks about sex. If you had told younger me that I would be a sexologist and doing this work that I'm doing, I never would have believed you, because I grew up in a Baptist church. It was a beautiful community feel for a lot of my early life. This is always the tension about these spaces, is that there's parts that I love when I look back on it, and then there's parts that I don't love so much. But growing up, I actually felt like it was quite a beautiful experience to have this community of people around me. And we were part of YWAM for a while, and then came back home to the Bay, and I really grew up until I was about 10, really soaked in that Baptist and apostolic kind of church environment. Then mum and dad left when I was around 10, and so then my teenage years were done. They still actively encouraged me to go to youth group though, so I did a lot of my teenage years kind of in and out of spaces. Good girl for youth group for most of the time, and then a bit of a party girl through my teenage years. So that was kind of my interactions with the church.
Were your parents always Christian?
No, they became Christians when I was 3.
So you're raised into this ideology, way of living, this religion. What did that look like for you on a daily basis as you were growing up?
Yeah, I mean, I have a really strong memory of being 3 years old and going to a friend's house with my mum and playing with their kids, and then this moment where she kind of pulled me aside and asked if I'd accepted Jesus as my Lord and Saviour. And I remember it really clearly being told about hell, and that it was really important that I chose Jesus as my Lord and Saviour. And then her reporting back to my mum when my mum picked me up that Meg had this moment where she'd chosen Jesus for herself. And so that was, there was that community element. So we were with other church members and the families. We were all kind of, moving and living our lives together throughout the week, as well as then Sunday church involvement. And then obviously going away to YWAM when my mum and dad joined that space. We lived on the YWAM bases. It was mum and dad were doing the training programs, and we were living and breathing YWAM spaces the whole time.
Yeah, did I hear you right that you said you were 3 when the adults in your life were saying you gave your heart to Jesus?
Yeah.
That is incredible to me, that the idea that a child can make a decision about something so important, a religion, at 3 years old. Like, when you look back on that now, what do you feel about that?
I feel sad for the 3-year-old me that was really scared of hell. And that was a theme through my life, is that there were nightmares about hell. It took me years and years to navigate how I felt about the idea of heaven and hell, and really deconstruct my theology around hell, because it wasn't just intellectual things that I'd learned as an adult. It was like baked in feelings. It was somatic. It was deep in my body from the time I was 3. So I feel sad for that young part of me who really didn't know that was not the kind of decision that a 3-year-old should be making, and that it wasn't also good or safe information to be giving a child of 3.
Yeah. And you talk about themes. So we've got this theme of hell, this idea that you give your heart to Jesus. Tell us and share with us some of the other themes that were very common normalities in your life growing up in the Baptist church.
There was a big theme for me around being a good girl, and that happens in a lot of spaces for a lot of women, but coming through the church, it has a particular kind of flavor. And so there was a lot of pressure on me to look right, to behave right, and that really amplifies as you come into puberty and then your teenagehood. So being the right kind of girl then has a whole lot of other layers. So I remember my parents, even though they were out of the church, we did a Christian adaptation of a bat mitzvah. I have some Jewish heritage, so it wasn't total cultural appropriation, but it was borderline. But we took those concepts and they did some character development work with me. A lot of that was based in the Dr. James Dobson, which we now know is not helpful. And it was really designed to help me become a woman of good character. And along with that, I signed a purity pledge that said I would not engage in any smutty behaviour. I didn't quite understand what smutty behaviour was. It was just this blanket term that meant I'm not going to do anything sexual until I get married. And then I was really excited because I got to go and choose a purity ring with my dad. And that, while that's often thought of as quite an American approach to purity, it certainly exists in our New Zealand Christian experiences for some people. And so, that was a big theme, my sexual purity as I came into puberty and moving towards adulthood.
So you're making a pledge, I'm not going to have sex, I'm going to stay pure. How old are you at that point?
13. It was my 13th
13.
birthday. I got a ring, I got my ears pierced, and I signed a pledge.
Wow. And is this an actual piece of paper that you sign? Where does the piece of paper go to? Do your parents keep it, or do you keep it?
No, I had a scrapbook with all of the character lessons that I'd learned. And I am also really aware that part of what my parents were doing, I think, was lovely at some level. They were trying to raise a person of good character, right? It's just unfortunately built into the theology and the ways that we were taught about those things, there's some very, very harmful messages.
You know, if I was your parent, though, and I am teaching you these things, I don't think these harmful messages that I'm teaching you as my daughter. So now looking back, what is it exactly that you feel was harmful to you? And can you explain that for us?
My parents, remember, they came from quite a different background. They didn't grow up in the church. So they took on these teachings and the ways that the church, and it was the Baptist church at the time and then the Apostolic church, the way that those spaces taught them was the right and godly way to raise their children. So they were working off a pattern that they also had no experience with. But the messages that were particularly harmful were the things around my body and who had ownership of my body. So the idea that as a woman, I was meant to be the gatekeeper so that I didn't cause men to lust. So I was meant to be modest and cover up and don't cause men to lust and stumble. And then also that my sexuality, I didn't get the sense really, even though I was making this decision and I felt like I was choosing, I'm not going to have sex till I got married. It really was like putting my sexuality on ice until I was married, and then I was meant to flick the switch and that was meant to be all good to go. And the reality is our bodies don't work like that. So there was all this pressure around how I had to show up sexually. Don't. And then you're going to, and it's going to be great. So lots of fairy tale myths involved there, ideas that you can flick a switch when that's not how the body and desire work.
It sounds like, you're a teenager trying to find out who you are in the world and figure out everything that comes along with going through puberty. But you're getting these very strict parameters about what it means to actually be, one, a female, and two, like a Christian. And so there's all these like, I guess for me, it feels like a way of controlling your identity. And there's no freedom for you to pick and choose who you are. Like very much, I know for me growing up in conservative evangelical Christianity, it was so the same. Like purity culture was like all the time, every dinner time, every church meeting. There was always like these ideas of adultery and fornication and sin and being dirty. And when you're receiving all this messaging, what does that how did it do to a young person? How do they internalize that? What was it like for you?
Yeah, I mean, what I see is with clients and also my experience was that it creates a lot of cognitive dissonance, like the sense of, well, I'm supposed to be this, but I'm also supposed to be this. And you feel torn between these two things. You feel like you know something or you understand something, because I felt like I was making active, engaged choices for myself at 13, right? So I'm emerging into adulthood. A lot of us in these spaces, we're trying to emerge into adulthood. We're trying to test out who we are in the world and what that feels like. And we feel like we've made good decisions. And then we come to realize, maybe I didn't have all the information. Maybe I didn't have the whole picture. Right. So then it's like this real tension. I
am feeling that tension as we're speaking. I'm feeling confused. Like I'm inside your story with you and I'm going, well, I feel confused about how I'm supposed to be and what I'm supposed to do. And it is naturally just confusing because you've got adults telling children, well, there is one way to be. And then if children don't fit into that, that's like incredibly shameful, or there's something wrong with me, or I'm doing something wrong. And now there's all this guilt that comes along with that. And you're always on edge as well, fearful, I might slip up, I might do something wrong. So for you, you're 13, you're making this pledge. And then what are your teen years look like as you continue to move through them?
Well, this is where the confusion really starts to take hold, because what's happening naturally and developmentally is that at that age we are supposed to be getting curious about sex and about development in those ways. So it was something that was going to happen in my body, whether I had made this purity pledge or not. I was going to get curious. I was going to start to feel things in my body. I was going to start to crush on people, and all of these things, they were always going to happen to some level. And I felt like I had to shut that down or turn that down. And that's really challenging when you've literally got hormones pumping through your body, encouraging you to notice all of these things.
We've been taught to naturally suppress something which is just natural to us, because desire is natural too. But when you're taught that desire is shameful and you're in this like youthfulness where you're actually developing your whole idea of sexuality and who you are as a sexual being, it feels very like stunted almost for me and my body as I'm talking about it. I'm feeling like, well, this would just stop me from being able to explore because there's so many rules and restrictions about what it means to be a sexual being. And when we talk about safety for teens and being safe, how does purity culture not help?
I'm really passionate about this part of the conversation because I really believe that the things that we are taught in purity culture and in those spaces, you can see the correlations to rape culture. So the ways that women are taught that they need to provide for the needs of their one-day husband doesn't feel like that is an even playing field for women. It feels like they have to show up and provide what the man asks for. Also, the ways that we're meant to cover up our bodies and stop our brothers in Christ from stumbling and lusting, those things, those make us feel like when somebody acts in an inappropriate way towards us, or even shows healthy, normal interest, that can make us feel like we are wrong or bad, or our body is wrong or bad. Also, this turning down of our sexual curiosity, our natural developmental desire to know, when we turn that down and suppress it, we can't just turn that down across that one little piece of our life. We're actually turning down our wanting, our desire, our voice across the board, right? So then we find it really hard to speak up. And I see this all the time with clients. They don't know how to speak about their pain, their pleasure, their preferences, because they haven't had a voice. There's very, very many correlations between the messages of purity culture and then what also creates environments where rape and abuse can happen unchecked.
I'm quite clearly hearing it come through your words where you're saying purity culture is the removal of choice and autonomy, and it is also purity culture is victim blaming, and purity culture is rape culture.
Yeah.
Because if a man lusts after me, whose fault is it?
Yeah.
If it's my body that tempted him, then we put the blame on my body. We don't look at the man. We don't point the finger where it should be pointed. We don't have accountability for an adult person's actions.
Yeah.
We blame the child.
Yeah.
Because it is often children that this is happening to inside of these spaces. And I guess this is where we're at in the conversation, where we're saying this is the harm that it causes. And you're getting teenagers growing up not knowing what saying no even means because they've never had ownership of, one, their voice, and two, their body. So was there a point in time where you were like, now I'm going to decide my body's mine? Like how did you start to kind of dismantle all of this messaging you'd been getting from the world about who you are, who you should be, and what you were and weren't allowed to do? I
think I lived in a very confusing space for those teenage years and then into my 20s because I was, on one hand, probably a little bit more outspoken than a lot of women in those spaces were meant to be. And so on one hand, I was bold and I would say what I thought and I would push back. And then on the other hand, I was trying so hard to be a good girl. So there were things that happened. Like I remember at 14, I got my top earring pierced when I was away with my best friend. And that was a big deal. Like the earrings were a big deal in our family. Yeah. But it was just my little like I want to choose something for me, right? Yeah. And so then there were things that I did. I actually left home at 17. I left my little small town and I went and lived and worked in Hong Kong, and I was, going to save the world, and I worked in an orphanage and Christian organization there. And that year was really my year where I was like, hey, nobody's watching. I can literally do anything I want. And so the party girl really came out there. Right. And so I started to really play with what I wanted to wear and how I wanted to look, and cut all my hair off and things like that, So there was I always think it's interesting when I reflect back on my story that there was this suppression and there was this struggle, and then yet our own spirit and fight is so wonderful to me, to see the ways that I was always looking for agency. I was always looking for little bits of autonomy and choice.
Oh my gosh, I love that so much. Like, just as you're talking, I can feel like a complete lift in my energy. I can feel that freedom coming through. You finally had some freedom when you moved to Hong Kong to really explore you and yourself and find out who you wanted to be in the world on your own terms. And that is just so super empowering. I love that so much. Can you talk to us a bit about your experiences with sex and having safe sex? Because I will say that just for me coming out, my parents taught me nothing about sex, except that I should give my body to a man when I'm inside marriage and whenever he wanted. So there was no idea that I'm allowed to say no, or there was these thoughts around birth control. Well, Lil, make sure, you use birth control and things like that. Actually, no, now that I'm thinking back, that's what I'm saying to my sisters today. But my parents never said that to me because they expected that I wouldn't be having sex. So how did you navigate safety during those years when you were exploring?
Yeah, so again, confusing. So I had a lot of health complications when I was young, and I did go on the pill really young to try and deal with which I then found out was endometriosis. And I remember a conversation from my dad where he said, just because you're on the pill, don't think you can have sex, right? So it was like, again, this real confusing thing. Well, it's for health and, and some girls think that if they're on the pill, that means they can have sex. But then I had also made this pledge, and you've got to remember I was like the eldest daughter and I was a good girl and then a part-time party girl, right? So I stuck with my pledge to not have sex until I got married. I did not sleep with anybody before I got married. I fooled around. I did a whole lot of stuff, but I made it as a technical virgin. I had no penis and vagina intercourse until I got married. So I never really learnt those building blocks of what it means to have safe sex outside of marriage. So a lot of that learning I've had to do since being married.
Were you still Christian, and is that why you wanted to wait for marriage, or by this point had you deconstructed your faith? Where were you at that made you decide not to have sex until marriage?
So I was still definitely a Christian, and I had gone overseas and I had so much guilt about the things that I got up to over there, and at the same time I was working really hard to be a good missionary girl. And so I came back to New Zealand, and I went to university and did things up in Auckland, and that's where I got together with my now husband, and we threw ourselves into like a Pentecostal apostolic church. And so all of our 20s, we were the good church kids, church family.
And so then you were married, you were still a Christian at that point in time. You and your husband had decided that you would save yourselves for marriage. But then somehow you end up here having a conversation with a Māori cult survivor about being a sexologist and deconstructing purity culture. How does that happen?
So I had babies at 24, 26, and everything in our marriage, after we got married, it was not the flipper switch, mystical, wonderful, sacred experience that everybody told me sex was going to be. So I was already having issues with pain and struggling with that. I had babies, did the good Christian mum thing, and also I wanted to have babies. Like, I was excited for that stage of my life. Then I realized as I came out of that fog with little young ones that we had not resolved all of the things in our marriage and our relationship and with our sex life. And I had gone over the years, as I had struggled with various things, I had gone and spoken to people in the church. I had spoken clearly to other women in the church about how I felt about sex and how I felt about my husband. And I'm really fortunate that I married truly one of the best men. He is so good. He never put any of this pressure on me, but we only knew what we knew, right? And so I would go and I would try to get some help or some understanding. I would listen to all the marriage books. I would listen to all of the sermons when someone came and spoke about marriage. And I would get advice like, well, honey, you might just have to take one for the team. And things like that maybe you need to pray more. And if you brought Jesus into the center of your relationship more. And like, you have to remember at this stage, both my husband and I were working for the church. We were in full-time ministry, involved working for the church. So we were like boots and all in the church. We were praying. We were doing all the things. And none of the information that I got there was helpful. And so I found myself at almost 10 years into our marriage, not really sure if I wanted to stay married. We were actually, we ended up traveling a bit for work with a business that I started, and we were sitting in Paris, city of love, and we were talking about getting divorced. And I just thought, how can this be true? How can this life that looks so beautiful on the outside, traveling the world, beautiful babies, great business, church involvement, how can this life be creating such tension in me? It must be me. I must be bad. I must be broken. There's something wrong with me. And so we ended up going on a process of like really good outside secular therapy. So not church-based therapy. We were already into the throes of deconstruction by then. We had a lot of questions theologically. But that just kind of sped it all up as once we were traveling and we were able to really ask the questions, because we were out of those spaces where we weren't every single week in another sermon and another.
Yeah, you're not immersed in those spaces anymore where you're receiving so much messaging about how you're supposed to be inside of a marriage and what that looks like. So I guess you get, again, autonomy and choice to define your marriage on your own terms, which is super inspiring and powerful for the two of you too. And so what kind of questions do you start to ask about sex within a marriage at this point?
Yeah, so some of the questions that I started asking myself, firstly, I had to realize that I even had the agency to ask myself, do I want to be in this marriage? Right? That was the first one. And that was probably the scariest one, because I just assumed that I had to stay married. And this beautiful therapist that we had, she said, Meg, you made that decision as an 18-year-old when you got together, 20 when you got married. What do you now, at the age you are now, what do you want to decide based on everything that you know now? And just that, I remember I went away for a work trip and I had like 2 weeks away, which was the longest I'd been away from my husband and babies for a really long time. And she told me to put that question in my pocket. I literally wrote it down, and it was like, what do I want now? What do I choose now? And I walked around Europe with this question in my pocket. And what do I want? And I let it sit with me in my body. What do I really want now? And it wasn't like a big lightning bolt moment where I suddenly had an answer, but I just started to feel into my body and what felt right, and listen to those messages of my body, which I had been taught for so long not to trust. So then there were questions around like, what's actually pleasurable to me? What kind of sex is sex worth having? How do I want our relationship to look in terms of the mental load and the physical load, and who takes care of different things? And so I started to ask questions of who I was, and I started to reclaim my identity for myself first. And then from that, I could then, like, that informed all the other spaces, my sex life and how our life looked day to day.
What did you start doing differently when it came to your sex life and how you interacted inside of your marriage as you were asking these beautiful leading and guiding questions of yourself? What did you actually start to change differently on a daily basis?
Yeah, I stopped having sex when I felt obligated to have sex.
Wow.
So we had a great conversation. Again, my husband, he's the coolest. He never put this pressure on me, but I had so much internal pressure about when I should be taking care of my husband's needs. And so I had in the back of my mind, and a lot of Christian women have this, I had in the back of my mind that I had about 3 days before then I was going to be on notice. Right? So that is based on a lot of the teaching of Dr. James Dobson. You still hear it in sermons now that there's a 72-hour rule that men need sex every 72 hours.
Oh my gosh.
And I thought, surely people aren't teaching this anymore. And I went back about 4 or 5 years ago, I went back and listened to a sermon. It was a current sermon at the time that our old church had put online about marriage and godly marriage. And they were still teaching the 72-hour rule, even though it's been completely debunked in science. So a lot of Christian women, and I definitely had that experience of feeling like I was kind of on like 3 days notice. And so I would get to that time period, and then every day after that, I would feel more and more guilty, more and more guilty. And I'd see how far I could push it. And then I'd have sex, and then I'd be like, oh, okay, clock's reset. I can take a breather. Okay, I've got a bit more time. And so I talked to my husband about it, and I was like, honey, I am not ever going to say yes to sex with you now unless I actually want to have it. So that was a big change that I made. And then we also had really good discussions about what does sex worth wanting look like for us? What kind of sex do we want to have? And taking the pressure off that always having to mean intercourse. So many Christian women feel like they have to have intercourse, right? Because that's the gold standard.
It is.
It's the gold standard.
You don't let anything in there. You keep it pure. So that's what sex actually is, isn't it?
Yeah. So we expanded our definition of what good sex is, and we started to focus on pleasure. What's actually pleasing to you and to me and to us together.
Oh gosh, I love that so much. I love all this questioning that you went on where you're starting to define what does it look like for us? How do we want to do this thing together? As you're living your life with your husband now, can you give us some examples of situations that you experience together where your desire doesn't match up or it does match up, and then how you navigate through that?
So I'd say a big one that it took probably the longest to get my head around was what happens when we go away. What happens when we take a weekend away? That one often felt like there was a lot of pressure around it. And so now, even to this day, when we book a weekend away or something like that together, one of us will say, hey, just a reminder, we might have sex, but we don't have to. And just that. And he will say it to me. He'll say, hey, honey, I'm so looking forward to going away with you. If we have sex or we don't, whatever, like, let's just go have a good time.
Yeah.
And a good time generally, not like, let's just go have fun together. And so that, I think, is one thing that I've definitely, even now, continued as an active practice in my life. And that thing of saying, oh, actually, I don't really feel like having sex now. That is a practice for us now. We're very, very honest with each other. I think that is the biggest thing, going from that feeling of pressure and obligation to what do we both want and would it be pleasing? Like, desire can't live where there's pressure and obligation. It just can't. It's like it needs lightness and air and oxygen for it to actually be able to grow.
Yeah, totally. I had an experience like this just the other day because I've had an incredibly busy week, right? And then my partner initiated with me and I was like, I want to, like, I really want to, but my mind is going a million miles an hour. And he was just patient. Like, he knew, okay, she'll get there eventually. I just have to keep giving her what she needs. And I communicated the entire time we were making love, hey, okay, I'm still in my head right now. Like I just talk to him about it and he just keeps loving me through that process. And slowly I start to come back into my body and I feel like I can enjoy the sensations and I'm not thinking about my freaking computer in the middle of it. And so it's this patience and this acceptance and this love to show up as you are. And then if it doesn't work out, it doesn't. And I used to get really frustrated if it didn't work out, right? And it is that pressure, and it's almost a mirror of your exiting this high control religious environment to now finding your freedom. It's the same thing. You remove obligation, you remove rules and restrictions, and you simply come to the board with whatever's there and you communicate about it and you have freedom, which seems to be a big theme of this conversation is finding that freedom. Let's say if you had a chance and an opportunity to go back into a church today and give a talk about sex and marriage, could you tell us what you would be teaching in there?
Yeah. So firstly, I would start by saying that I'm never going to assume that everybody in the room has waited until marriage to have sex. And the first thing I'm going to clear up is that if you have had sex outside of marriage, that changes nothing about your worth. And that may have been a choice that you made. And like I'm actually not pro waiting anymore. So this is a challenging one for me to answer because I would struggle to go back into a church to talk about this, to be honest. If I'm really honest. But that's the first thing I would be saying. And I would also be talking to like our LGBTQ plus community and brothers and sisters and saying, hey, if that is how you experience attraction, you're not bad and broken either. So I would be doing a whole lot of work before I even started talking about sex and marriage.
Wow.
But I know that churches don't particularly love to have those conversations.
No, they don't, but they certainly are the spaces that require them. And so then LGBTQ, like surely you were raised believing homosexuality was wrong. Am I making an assumption there? Or?
No, I was. And it wasn't until, and this was a big part of our deconstruction process, we had a really beloved family member come out to us, and one of their concerns was that my husband and I would not love them after they told us this, and that they would, and we have a beautiful relationship with them. And the thought that this person would feel that we would in any way not love them, like, it makes me emotional because we love them so much. And so the thought that our theology and the things that we had been raised to believe about this, that was actively harmful to our family member and to their experience of life was just, so that was where a lot of the unpicking started to happen for us.
Yes.
And I think about how brave it was for them to come out to us, really, in light of the environment that we were heavily involved in.
Yeah, absolutely. Like it was very, very similar for me. Like homosexuality is a sin. Like homosexuals are going to hell. It's sodomy. They are child rapists. Like there was all of this idea about what being homosexual even means. And it was all wrong and wicked and made out to be like they were the most terrible people in the world. And then I had friends also who were homosexual, and I am bisexual as well, identify lesbian and queer. And to me, I was like, well, why would I not love this person?
Yeah.
And then in turn, I had to go, and then why would I not love myself? But my biggest fear around it was lack of acceptance from my family because of this harmful theology. And what I can really notice underneath all of that, and tell me your thoughts too, is that love is so conditional in the church. You get loved if you do this. You are okay if you don't have sex before marriage. You are going to heaven if you don't tell a lie. You are not sinful if you cover your skin. Like all of these, if this, then you're okay. So how has leaving that culture redefined your idea and your understanding of love?
Oh, what a big, beautiful, encompassing question. So my view of love now, I look at my children, they're now teenagers, and I look at my children and I think, how could I ever tell them that who they are is not wonderful? And yes, they're exploring and they're learning and they're growing. How could I ever tell them right from the beginning that they're sinful and that they're going to hell? I just, it's so many million miles away from what I grew up with. I just can't imagine teaching that to my children. And so I think it's made me, coming out of those spaces, has made me a lot more aware of other people's experiences. I feel like my love is much more expansive than it was in the church. I feel like I love more fully and freely than I maybe did before.
Yeah, because we're taught this idea that God is love. And God is love, but God only loves you if you do these things. So then as a child, you're raised believing love to be a certain way, especially when it comes to smacking, getting hit by your parents. So what does it teach a child when you're hit by your parent, but you're taught that getting hit is actually love? How does that impact someone? Can you talk to us about your experience and how you kind of pulled all that apart? Because it's so complicated.
Yeah, it's very complicated. And that's where a lot of, in my experience in the Baptist church we're a part of, that's where the Dr. James Dobson teachings came in as well. So us and a lot of other families around us, you would be smacked until you stopped crying. So not always, but I certainly remember that there were occasions where either ourselves, like being myself and my siblings, or other people that we knew. And some families were stricter on it than others, and, but you'd be smacked until you stopped crying, because the point was to govern your will, to help to manage that strong-willed child. And so that makes a child, when you're being smacked, obviously there's physical pain involved. And so you are having a bodily reaction, and tears and crying are a natural bodily reaction. So it's just another example of how you as the child are taught to stuff down the messages of your body. And actually it goes back to the aestheticism that Christianity is rooted in. So this idea from St. Augustine and many of the founding fathers of the Christian faith was that the spirit and the body are separate, and that the spirit and the intellect are more valued and important than the body. The body is carnal. The body is something that needs to be controlled. And so when you are actively teaching children through that, through smacking or through the purity culture teachings or any of these various ways that the church teaches it, we're teaching that aestheticism, we're teaching the separation. And actually what we need is integration. 80% of the work of our autonomic nervous system is actually below the neck in the body. Right? So the 20% of our nervous system is happening up here in cognitive function and our social engagement system, but actually 80% of it is the messages of the body. And so we're actively ignoring 80% of the messages of our nervous system. So we're turning down our survival instincts, we're turning down our pleasure, we're all of it, turning it down. I don't know if that answered the question. It felt like a big question, but hopefully that kind of...
I love that explanation that you've just given, because it puts things into a perspective for people who have been through experiences like this. And even myself as a child, like, the church is turning out young people who are so disconnected and fragmented from, one, their identity and who they are, but two, their ability to stand up for, survive and defend themselves, because they've been taught that all of these natural reactions are wrong and they're to suppress them. But then they're so separated and so what's the word? Like I'm thinking of right now wholeness. Like today as a person, I feel like I'm a whole person. And I work with my body. I work with my mind. It's this holistic approach to all of me. And all of me and all of my parts are okay to be here. My pain, my pleasure, my joy, my anger, all of that is okay. But I felt like as a teenager, I put all of that in a little box in the back of my head, locked it and threw away the key. And we literally had a song that went like lock it in the box and throw away the key. And that's what you did with the devil. So, but I was taking that idea and almost projecting that onto myself and locking away all these pieces of myself. And then we have these people coming out of the church who have no idea who they are. Like people come out of the cult where I was raised, they don't even know what their favorite color is. No one has ever asked them, what is your favorite color? That's just so mind-boggling to me now. But I truly understand and I see how it keeps happening for children who are coming through really conservative, high control environments. And so you've moved into this work as a sexologist. Talk to us about how you then go, I'm going to make a career from everything that I have lived and learned, and I'm going to help other people with that.
Yeah. So again, never thought I'd be the girl that talks about sex, but I was finding that moving out of the feelings of pressure and into this freedom, I was like, whoa, why didn't anybody ever tell me about this? I never got this information when I talked about it in church. And while I was pretty far into my deconstruction, I still had a lot of church connections. And so I had a group of church friends, and like early on in my journey, I put a message out to maybe 10 of them. And I said, hey, I read a study recently that if women just talk about their sexual experiences without giving anybody advice, we're not giving advice. If we just talk about our experiences, their satisfaction improves by like 24 or 25%. And I said, look, I'm going to start a private Facebook group. You can forward this, like pass this message to any other girlfriends that you think would be up for the conversation, and let's just talk about it, because I'm in such a different place now, and I didn't feel like I had anybody to talk to in the church about it. And in 4 days, I ended up with 400 women inside a private Facebook group.
Wow.
And then, so I've actually done this twice where I've opened Facebook groups and tried. And so that first time I was like, kind of like, what's happening? And we kind of had some chats, and then I was like, whoa, everybody's kind of looking at me, and I'm like, I don't know. So that's when I went back and I retrained and I did some stuff. And I was running another business at the time. I didn't think that this would become my career. But then as I was just taking on, like I started taking on coaching clients, and I was doing my clinical sexology stuff in the background and my psych stuff, and I was taking on clients in the background, and then we had COVID. And I was well out of the church by then, and I was like, you know what? Stuff it. I can't travel. I can't do the other business now. It's not really practical or reasonable. And I was like, okay, well, I guess I'm just going to be all in on this one for a while. And that's really when I started to own it and talk about it. Yeah. Even though I'd been doing it for quite a number of years beforehand in the background.
I don't want to gloss over the part where you say you left the church. So did you actually leave the church? Are you not a Christian now?
Yeah, so I did leave the church. I always find the label of Christian very challenging. I don't know that I would call myself a Christian now, but I still really have a sense of spirituality and connection to God or the divine, whatever you want to call that. We left the church, and that in itself, like that's a whole other podcast conversation, like what it's like to walk away from your community. And, as you know well, there's friendships and connections that you think are so deep and so important, and then they're just gone. And so that was a really challenging time. But thankfully, we have some beautiful friends who didn't just say, oh, you've left the church. Like we had kind of bridging friendships. So we felt like, and we also had built a beautiful community through our kids' school. We'd moved city. We'd done a whole lot of things. And so we started to realize that, there's beautiful community outside of the church as well. And it's possible to find people who will also love and support you outside of that church context.
Right. So you lived together as a family?
Yeah. Definitely there was like a little tension between my husband and I, a period of a few years where I was pretty well out and he was like, but, So we're navigating that is a real challenge for a relationship as well. Having that conversation with him early in the start of our deconstruction saying, hey, honey, so you know how I vowed to put God at the center of our marriage and trust you as the leader of our home? Like, I don't think you're the leader of the family anymore.
That's funny. You would only get that if you've been taught that the man is the head of the home. But really I suppose in patriarchal societies, isn't it?
But like challenging for him as well, because he had been raised to believe that he was meant to be the leader of the home, and he never exercised that in ways that were horrible and misogynistic. But he still was like, oh, okay, this is a big shift for me as well. And so while we had been functionally quite egalitarian for a long time, unpacking that theology and going, okay, what does this actually mean? That we're truly equal partners in this marriage, not just complementary, truly equal partners. There was a whole lot of untangling there too.
Yeah, that's a wonderful question, and also an important conversation because it's not just women that the church defines these roles for. And the messaging, it is men too. They have to go, okay, this is the role I'm supposed to have, but if I don't want to fit into that, where do I go now? And then also the idea that they don't have control over their body, and deconstructing purity culture is empowering for men because they get to know that they actually have choice, power and autonomy over their own bodies, and they are not just a slave to their whims, which is all this theology and doctrine that they have been taught. So it really puts the power back in the hands of each individual, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And I always find it so ridiculous if we really break it down and think about it, that men are taught that they're meant to be the leaders of everything, lead the church and lead the family, but they don't, and they're supposed to have control over all that, but they don't have control over their sexual desire and their urges. Or if they do have it, they're also supposed to be kind of punishing themselves and pushing themselves into boxes and feeling guilty for masturbating and all these things that come with that church culture. So, there's a lot for men to unpack. And like statistically, if you look at women who say that they were negatively affected by purity culture, 95% of women who came from high control religion will say that they feel they were negatively affected by purity culture, versus about 25% of men would say that they were negatively affected. But I would love one day for there to be more research around this, because anecdotally what I see in my practice is that actually there are a lot of men who often come in just as the husbands of the woman I'm working with, and sometimes we'll end up doing a shared session together or something. And then they start to unpack and realize all the ways that they've. So I think that actually that statistic is skewed, because I just don't think men understand that they too have been affected by purity culture. And like you say, they are allowed to also have agency and autonomy over their bodies and desire.
If I am a woman and I'm deconstructing these ideas of how I have to be in marriage, inside the church, the idea that I have to save myself, and I'm going through these feelings of guilt and feeling dirty if I do want sex or I am having sex, what advice do you have for women who are deconstructing purity culture?
There's so much I could say here, but one thing I would start with is, firstly, you are not broken and you are not bad if desire is not showing up in the ways that you think it should. So a lot of women that I speak with feel like they are bad and broken, and they are the reason their sex life or their marriage is struggling. You are not bad or broken if desire doesn't show up when you click your fingers. And so getting some education around that piece of the puzzle will do so much for your process, because if you actually learn how desire works, responsive, spontaneous, breaks, accelerators, all the things, if you learn how it works in the female body, so different to how it works in the male body, then you can start to have a conversation where if you're partnered with somebody, where you can have conversation with them and say, okay, this is what I need in this moment. Like you described how you beautifully told your partner, hey, I'm really in my head. And he's like, okay, time, patience. It takes more time physically for a woman's body to be aroused enough for intercourse, for pleasure, So that would be the first thing, is you're not bad, you're not broken.
And if you had a book that you could recommend to someone who's going on this journey, what would that be?
Yeah, so if it's specifically around working to understand and heal your sex life, then I would say read Emily Nagoski's book called Come As You Are. So Come As You Are sounds like a Christian title. Isn't there an old hymn?
It does.
It's not a Christian book at all. It is a wonderful book at unpacking some of those things I've just briefly mentioned, the dual control mechanism and things like that, and how desire actually works in our body. She also is a great writer, so it's an easy read. So go through and read that. And can I bonus second book?
Absolutely, go for it. We love a bonus, don't we, everyone?
There's also a book called Pure by Linda K. Klein. And if you are feeling alone in your experience of purity culture, she did her thesis on people's experience of purity culture, and it's stories. It is a bit of a challenging read. Both of these might be challenging reads depending on where in your process you are, but that is a beautiful one for helping to understand the larger context, particularly if you've come out of an evangelical culture. She's American, so she writes from that American context, but yeah, I think both of those books are wonderful.
Thank you so much for your time to come on here and share your story with us today and take us inside your life, your journey, and then to share your expertise with us as well. I'm really, really grateful, and I'm sure everyone who is listening is grateful too. If anyone wants to find you, how can they reach out and find you?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm at megcowan.com, or I'm on Instagram at Meg C. Cowan. So either of those, go there. There's a bunch of things, helpful free resources, ways you can get in contact with me. So,
tēnā koe. Amazing. Well, everyone, that is Meg Cowan. I hope you've enjoyed this beautiful chat today, taking you inside what purity culture looks like, the harm it causes, but then ultimately how you can move away from it to find freedom and autonomy in your body. Thank you for spending this hour with us and this time with us as we've worked through this together. And again, thank you, Meg, for showing up on the show and sharing all of your goodies with us. Thank you so much. And everyone, have a beautiful day.